The notification light on my phone cut through the darkness of my small apartment like a searchlight. I squinted at the screen, reading my mother's text through bleary eyes. "Don't forget to transfer the money, Vanessa. Your brother's wedding gift needs to be ordered today." I glanced at my bank account balance, $47.82. Then at the half-eaten ramen on my desk, my third meal of the week. Meanwhile, she was asking for $500 I didn't have for a crystal vase my brother would probably never use. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. I was 26, working 2 jobs, and barely making rent in the city. My mother knew this. She also knew about the trust fund my grandfather had set up for me, the one I wasn't supposed to access until I was 30. The one she somehow had access to as a financial guardian, until I reached that milestone birthday. The one that had mysteriously dwindled over the years, while she remodeled her kitchen and took cruises to the Mediterranean. "Mom, I don't have $500, I typed back. Her response arrived within seconds, as if she'd been waiting, fingers poised. "You always ruin things. Your brother deserves this. Why are you so selfish?" The phone slipped from my hand onto my threadbare couch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, a familiar coldness spread through my chest, as if my heart had wrapped itself in ice, bracing for a storm I'd weathered countless times before. My name is Vanessa Mitchell. I'm 26, and an aspiring graphic designer working reception at a dental office to pay the bills. This is the story of how I reclaimed my future from the woman who called me a burden while secretly living off my inheritance. I stared at the ceiling of my studio apartment, counting the water stains that formed abstract continents on the off-white surface. 4 years of design school, thousands in student loans I was repaying myself, and a portfolio full of promise. Yet here I was, eating ramen at midnight, being guilted over money that was technically mine. How did I get here? The answer was complicated, but it started with trust, misplaced trust. My grandfather, Samuel Mitchell, had built a modest fortune through his construction company. He wasn't extravagantly wealthy, but he was smart with money. When he died when I was 16, he left trusts for all his grandchildren. Mine was worth $180,000, earmarked for education, a home down payment, or starting a business after I turned 30. But he made one critical mistake. He named my mother as trustee until I reached that age. "It's for your own good," she'd tell me whenever I asked about the money. "You're too impulsive. Too dreamy. You'd blow it all on art supplies and fancy computers." She'd say this while wearing a new designer watch or showing off photos from her latest vacation. I never questioned her too directly. Years of conditioning had taught me that challenging her authority meant enduring weeks of silent treatment, subtle put-downs in front of family, or worse, her tearful proclamations about how ungrateful I was. But something changed last month. My best friend Zoe, who works at an investment firm, asked me a simple question. "Have you ever seen the trust statements?" I hadn't. Not once in 10 years. "That's not normal, Vanessa," she said carefully. "You should at least know the balance, even if you can't touch it yet." That conversation planted a seed of suspicion that grew into a gnawing doubt I couldn't shake. I called the bank that held the trust the next day, only to discover I wasn't authorized to receive any information. "Only the trustee can access those details," the representative explained. My stomach twisted into knots as I hung up. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to my mother's house while she was at her weekly bridge game, used the spare key she didn't know I had copied, and searched her home office. I wasn't proud of it, but desperation had pushed me past caring about propriety. In the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, beneath tax documents and insurance policies, I found a folder labeled Vanessa's Trust. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were quarterly statements going back years. I started with the most recent and worked backward, each page turning like a knife in my gut. The current balance, $37,462. Almost $143,000 gone. Withdrawn systematically over the years in amounts ranging from $5,000 to $20,000. Each withdrawal noted with vague descriptions. educational expenses, medical care, property investment. I had paid for my own education with loans. I had basic health insurance through my job and had never had any major medical issues. And I certainly didn't own any property. I photographed every page with shaking hands, replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it, and left without a trace. That night, I didn't sleep. I scrolled through the photos, calculating each unauthorized withdrawal, matching dates with memories. A $15,000 withdrawal coincided with her kitchen renovation. Another $20,000 disappeared the same month she took that luxury cruise with her friends. $10,000 more vanished when my brother got married and she threw him an extravagant rehearsal dinner. From both of us. She had told everyone, though I'd been working double shifts that month to afford the bridesmaid dress she insisted I buy. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was the years of being called lazy, unmotivated, a dreamer who couldn't handle reality. It was the constant comparisons to my successful brother with his corporate job and suburban home. A home, I now realized, that might have been partially funded by my money. It was being labeled a burden by the very person who was burdening me, draining away my future dollar by dollar, while maintaining her image as the supportive, sacrificing mother. I didn't confront her immediately. Something inside me had changed that night in her office. The fog of self-doubt she had cultivated my entire life began to lift, revealing a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. I needed a plan, not an emotional confrontation that she would twist and manipulate as she always did. My mother was an expert at rewriting narratives, at turning herself into the victim. Not this time. The next morning, I called in sick to the dental office and made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in trust law. Marcus Jennings had kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened without interruption as I explained my situation, spreading the photographed trust statements across his desk, like evidence at a crime scene. "What you're describing is breach of fiduciary duty," he said when I finished. "As trustee, your mother has a legal obligation to manage the trust in your best interest, not her own. These withdrawals," he tapped a particularly large one from 3 years ago, "appear to have no connection to your welfare or education. Can I get the money back?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Potentially. We'd need to petition the court to remove her as trustee first, then file for restitution of misappropriated funds. Do you have any documentation proving these withdrawals weren't for your benefit?" I thought about my student loans, the medical bills I'd paid myself, the tiny apartment I could barely afford. "I can prove I paid for everything myself. Would that work?" He nodded slowly. "It's a start, but I'll be honest with you, Vanessa, these cases can get messy, especially with family. Are you prepared for that?" Was I prepared to publicly challenge the woman who had raised me? To expose her theft and breach of trust? To face the family fallout that would inevitably follow? I thought about all the times she had called me a burden, all while living off my inheritance. All the gaslighting, the subtle put-downs, the ways she had undermined my confidence and independence, while presenting herself as my greatest supporter. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What happened next was both faster and slower than I expected. Marcus helped me file an emergency petition to freeze the remaining trust assets, preventing my mother from withdrawing more money once she realized I was onto her. The court granted this within days, but the legal process to remove her as trustee and recover the misappropriated funds would take months. In the meantime, I had to decide whether to confront her or let the legal papers do it for me. I chose the latter, not out of cowardice, but strategy. The moment she received the court notice, my phone exploded with calls and texts. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent one brief message. "I know about the trust withdrawals. My lawyer will handle all communication from now on." Her response was predictable. Denial, then outrage, then manipulation. "I've only ever used that money for your benefit." Quote, she wrote, "Everything I've done has been for you. You have no idea the sacrifices I've made." I didn't respond. I forwarded the message to Marcus and blocked her number. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I called my brother. Ryan and I had never been close. 4 years older and relentlessly practical. He had always been our mother's favorite, the responsible one, the successful one, the one who never caused problems. I hadn't spoken to him outside of family gatherings in over a year, but I needed to know if he was part of this, if he knew what our mother had been doing. "Ryan," I said when he answered, "did you know Mom has been taking money from my trust fund, the one Grandpa set up for me?" The pause that followed told me everything. "Vanessa," he sighed, "Mom said that was a joint family investment account. For all of us." My heart sank. "And did you get any of that money? Did she use it for you?" Another pause. "She helped with our down payment. And James's private school. But she said you agreed to it, that you wanted to help since you don't have kids or a mortgage." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "Ryan, I live in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling. I eat ramen for dinner most nights. I have $50,000 in student loans. Does that sound like someone who's giving away money to pay for her nephew's private school?" "She said you were bad with money," he said weakly. "That you needed her to manage it for you. And you believed her, just like you always do." I wasn't angry at him, not really. He was just another victim of her manipulation, albeit one who had benefited from it. "Check your bank statements, Ryan. See how much of my money you've been living on. Then decide whose side you're on." I hung up before he could respond. Then I turned off my phone completely and cried for the first time since discovering the theft. Not for the money, though that loss was devastating, but for the family I never really had. For the mother who saw me as a resource to exploit, rather than a daughter to love. For the brother who had accepted her lies without question, because they benefited him. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, there were dozens of missed calls and messages. Not just from my mother and brother, but from aunts, uncles, cousins. She had mobilized the entire family against me. According to them, I was ungrateful, vindictive, mentally unstable. I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding. I was hurting my mother, who had sacrificed everything for me. I forwarded each message to Marcus without reading them fully. Then I went to work at the dental office, smiled at patients, filed insurance claims, and pretended my world wasn't imploding. That evening, I met Zoe for coffee and finally told her everything. "Holy shit," she said when I finished. "Your mom is a sociopath." I flinched at the word, then realized it might not be far from the truth. The worst part is, even knowing what she did, there's this voice in my head, her voice, telling me I'm overreacting, that I'm being dramatic, that I should just forgive her because she's family. Zoe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's because she's been programming you your whole life to doubt yourself, to put her needs first, to accept her version of reality over your own. That's what abusers do, Vanessa. Abuser." Another word that made me flinch, but it fit. The financial exploitation was just the tangible evidence of a lifetime of emotional abuse. The constant criticism disguised as concern. The comparison to others designed to diminish my self-worth. The subtle ways she undermined my independence while claiming to support me. The burden she complained about carrying while secretly burdening me with her financial needs. "I need to get away from her," I said suddenly. Completely. Not just blocking her number, but physically moving somewhere she can't find me. "You can stay with me until this is resolved," Zoe offered immediately. "My spare room is yours for as long as you need it." That night, I packed everything I cared about into my car. My clothes, my design portfolio, my laptop, and the few mementos I had from my grandfather. I left most of my furniture behind. It was all secondhand anyway. I wrote a check for the remainder of my lease, left the keys with my landlord, and drove to Zoe's apartment across town. It wasn't running away. It was running toward something better. Safety, self-respect, and the first steps toward reclaiming what was mine. Two days later, I received an email from Ryan. No accusations, no defense of our mother. Just a simple statement. I looked at the numbers. You're right, I'm sorry, what can I do? I forwarded his email to Marcus, who suggested a meeting. Ryan agreed immediately. The three of us met at Marcus's office the following week. Ryan looked older somehow, the confident swagger replaced by genuine contrition. He brought financial records showing exactly how much of my trust money had filtered through our mother to him. $62,000 for his house down payment, $36,000 for James's private school tuition, another $15,000 for a family vacation to Hawaii that I hadn't been invited to. I had no idea, he said, his voice thick. She told me Grandpa had set up different amounts for each of us based on need, and that yours was smaller because you didn't have the same expenses I did. I should have questioned it. I should have asked you directly. I wanted to be angry with him, but the guilt in his eyes was punishment enough. Besides, he wasn't the architect of this betrayal, just another pawn in our mother's game, albeit one who had benefited significantly. I'll pay it back, he said firmly. All of it. I've already talked to our financial advisor about restructuring our mortgage to free up the cash. Marcus raised an eyebrow, impressed. That would certainly strengthen our case against your mother. The court would look favorably on family restitution. Ryan nodded, then turned to me. There's something else you should know. Mom's been telling people you're having a mental breakdown. That you've always been unstable and prone to delusions. She's trying to set up a narrative that you're not competent to manage your own money. I laughed bitterly. Classic. Discredit the victim so no one believes the accusation. I've already told her I'm not backing her story, Ryan said. She didn't take it well. Let me guess. You're betraying her? You're ungrateful? You've broken her heart? I recited the familiar script of our mother's emotional manipulation. Ryan's sad smile confirmed I'd hit the mark. Almost word for word. It's like, once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Welcome to my entire life, I said, but without rancor. For the first time, I felt like my brother was truly seeing me, and our mother. Clearly. As we left Marcus's office, Ryan hesitated, then pulled me into an awkward hug. I'm gonna make this right, Vanessa, I promise. I believed him, but I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Our mother wouldn't surrender without a fight. Not the money, and certainly not her carefully constructed image as the selfless, devoted parent. She proved me right the very next day. I received an email from a cousin I'd always been close with. I don't know what's going on, but Aunt Catherine showed up at Mom's house crying yesterday. She said you're trying to take all her savings, that you've turned Ryan against her, and that you're making up stories about her stealing from you. Is everything okay? I replied with a simple factual account of what had happened, attaching copies of some of the trust statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals. I'm not asking anyone to take sides, I concluded. I just want the truth to be known. By the end of the week, the family had split into factions. Some believed me, particularly those who had witnessed my mother's manipulative behavior over the years but had never named it. Others stood firmly with her, convinced I was the ungrateful daughter she portrayed me to be. A few tried to stay neutral, suggesting compromise and forgiveness, without understanding that this wasn't a simple disagreement. It was theft, betrayal, and decades of emotional abuse. I stopped engaging with the family drama and focused on rebuilding my life. I found a new job at a small design studio that paid better than the dental office. I threw myself into creating a portfolio that showcased my true abilities. I started therapy to unravel the knots of self-doubt and unworthiness my mother had tied in my psyche. And I let Marcus handle the legal battle while I handled the emotional one. 3 months after filing the petition, we had our first court date. My mother arrived dressed in subdued colors, her face a mask of maternal concern. I hardly recognized this performance of demure suffering. It was so far from the domineering, critical woman I knew behind closed doors. She had brought reinforcements. My Aunt Patricia, who testified about my history of exaggeration and difficulty accepting responsibility. My Uncle Gregory, who spoke of her sacrifices and devotion as a single mother. Even my cousin's husband, who claimed I had once asked him for money to fund a shopping addiction, a complete fabrication. I sat quietly beside Marcus as they painted this fictional portrait of me. When it was our turn, we didn't engage with the character assassination. Instead, we presented facts. Bank statements showing the withdrawals, documentation proving I had paid for my own education and living expenses, affidavits from former roommates confirming my frugal lifestyle, and, most devastating to my mother's case, Ryan's notarized statement acknowledging receipt of my trust funds and his plan to repay them. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, asked my mother directly, "Mrs. Mitchell, can you provide documentation showing how these withdrawals benefited your daughter as intended by the trust?" My mother's composure cracked slightly. "I've always acted in Vanessa's best interest. As her mother, I know what she needs better than she does. The money went to family expenses, which ultimately benefit her as part of our family." "That's not how trusts work," the judge said flatly. The grantor's intentions were clear. This money was for Vanessa's education, housing, or business, not family vacations or your other children's expenses. The ruling came 2 weeks later. My mother was removed as trustee, replaced by a court-appointed fiduciary until I turned 30, just 8 months away. She was ordered to provide a full accounting of all withdrawals from the trust since its inception, and to repay any amounts that couldn't be justified as directly benefiting me according to the trust's terms. If she couldn't repay, liens would be placed on her assets. It was a clear legal victory, but it felt hollow. No court order could restore the relationship that should have existed between a mother and daughter. No repayment plan could erase the years of being made to feel like a burden by the very person who was secretly burdening me. The money mattered. Yes. It was my future, my security, my grandfather's legacy to me. But the deeper wound was knowing that my mother had never seen me as someone to nurture and protect, only as a resource to exploit. The day after the ruling, I received a letter from her. Not an apology, but a manifesto of martyrdom. 8 pages detailing all she had sacrificed for me, all the ways I had disappointed her, all the pain I was causing by choosing money over family. The final paragraph read, "Someday, when you have children of your own, you'll understand what it means to give everything for someone who gives nothing in return. I only pray you never experience the heartbreak of raising a child who grows up to betray you." I read it once, then burned it in Zoe's kitchen sink. I didn't need to keep physical reminders of her manipulation. I had carried them inside me for 26 years. It was time to let them go. Ryan kept his promise. Over the next 6 months, he repaid every cent of my money that had gone to him and his family. It meant refinancing his house, pulling James from private school, and selling his luxury car, but he did it without complaint. "It was never mine to begin with," he said simply. "I'm just returning what I unknowingly took." My mother was less cooperative. She claimed poverty, insisted she couldn't possibly repay the remaining funds, about $30,000 after Ryan's restitution, and continued to paint herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter's vendetta. The court was unimpressed. They placed a lien on her house and garnished a portion of her teacher's pension until the debt was satisfied. On my 30th birthday, control of my trust transferred to me as originally intended. The balance was almost completely restored, $172, $358, just $7, $642 short of the original amount. More importantly, I was free, not just financially, but emotionally. The fog of self-doubt my mother had cultivated had lifted. The voice in my head that questioned my worth, my abilities, my right to happiness, had quieted. I used part of the money to start my own design studio, focusing on branding for small businesses. Another portion went toward a down payment on a small but sunny condo in a neighborhood I loved. The rest stayed invested, growing steadily as I built my business and my new life. My mother continued her campaign of victimhood among family and friends, but fewer and fewer people believed her version of events. The facts were too clear, the pattern of exploitation too obvious once exposed to light. Some family members who had initially sided with her eventually reached out to apologize and reconnect with me. Others remained distant, unable to reconcile the loving maternal figure they thought they knew with the woman who had systematically stolen from her own daughter while calling her a burden. I didn't chase after anyone's approval or understanding. I was done trying to prove my worth to people who couldn't or wouldn't see it. Instead, I focused on building relationships with those who valued me, supported me, and respected my boundaries. Zoe, a few cousins who had always been kind, new friends from work and my neighborhood, and, gradually, Ryan and his family. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that the theft of my trust fund was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to confront not just my mother's betrayal, but all the ways I had internalized her criticism and manipulation. It showed me who my real allies were. It taught me that I wasn't the burden she had always claimed I was. She was the one who had burdened me with her emotional and financial demands, her unrealistic expectations, her need to control and diminish me to elevate herself. Most importantly, it taught me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, setting boundaries isn't cruel, demanding respect isn't unreasonable. And family, real family, doesn't exploit or diminish you. It lifts you up, celebrates your successes, supports your dreams, and respects your autonomy. Last week, I received an invitation to a family reunion organized by my Aunt Susan, one of the relatives who had initially sided with my mother, but later apologized sincerely. A handwritten note was enclosed. "Your mother won't be attending. This is a safe space for you. We've missed you. I haven't decided if I'll go." Part of me wants to reconnect with the family members who have shown genuine remorse and understanding. Another part wonders if it's better to leave the past behind entirely and focus on the chosen family I've built around me. Whatever I decide, I know this: I am not a burden. I never was. The only burden I carried was the weight of my mother's lies, manipulation, and betrayal, and I finally set it down. I've reclaimed not just my trust fund, but my trust in myself. And that is a victory worth more than any amount of money. The morning after my 30th birthday, I woke to an email notification from the bank. "Your trust fund has been transferred to your full control." Just like that, a decade and a half of waiting was over. I sat cross-legged on my bed in Zoe's spare room, staring at the balance on my phone screen. $172, $358. It was surreal to see the number there, to know it was finally mine to control, to build with, to protect. A bittersweet victory, considering how hard I'd had to fight for what was always meant to be mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up as I contemplated my next steps. The legal battle had consumed 6 months of my life, draining my energy and forcing me to confront painful truths about my family. But now it was time to focus on the future. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet, something my financial therapist had suggested. Column A, practical needs. Column B, future security. Column C, dreams. I began to allocate portions of my newly reclaimed inheritance, feeling a surge of empowerment with each entry. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Happy Trust Fund Day. How does it feel to be in control?" I smiled, appreciating his attempt at lightness. Our relationship was still healing, still fragile, but it was healing nonetheless. "Overwhelming," I texted back, "but in a good way." He replied almost immediately. "Mom's telling everyone you forced her into poverty, and she might lose her house. Just wanted to warn you before it gets back to you." The smile slipped from my face. Of course she was. The court-ordered repayment plan was hardly pushing her into poverty. She still had her teacher's pension, her house, which was nearly paid off, and the money she'd saved from not having to pay for her own expenses all those years she'd been dipping into my trust. But my mother never missed an opportunity to paint herself as the victim, especially when the alternative was acknowledging her own wrongdoing. "Thanks for the heads up," I replied. "Not surprised. How are you holding up with the refinance?" "We're managing. James misses his private school friends, but he's adjusting to public school. Turns out kids are resilient when you're honest with them about money." I appreciated that he didn't try to make me feel guilty about his son's changed circumstances. That would have been the old Ryan, the one who'd uncritically absorbed our mother's narrative about me being selfish, difficult, a burden. The new Ryan was learning to see through her manipulations and take responsibility for his own choices, including the choice to accept money that was never his to take. "Kids are smarter than we give them credit for," I texted back. "Want to grab coffee this weekend? I'd like to see James too, if that's okay." He'd love that. He keeps asking when Aunt Nessa is coming over again. A warm feeling spread through my chest. Before all this, I'd been the Aunt James saw at obligatory family gatherings, the one who brought presents his grandmother had actually chosen and paid for, with my money, I now realized. Now I was Aunt Nessa, the one who took him to science museums and helped him build model rockets in the park. It was one of the unexpected gifts of this painful journey, the chance to build authentic relationships with the people who mattered, free from my mother's controlling influence. That afternoon, I had my final session with Dr. Rao, the therapist I'd been seeing since discovering the theft. She'd been instrumental in helping me recognize the patterns of emotional abuse that had made me vulnerable to my mother's financial exploitation in the first place. "How are you feeling about the trust transfer?" she asked after we'd settled into our usual seats. "Lighter," I said. "Like I've been carrying this heavy backpack for years, and suddenly it's gone. Not just the worry about the money, but the weight of her expectations, her criticism, her ownership of me." Dr. Rao nodded. "That's a powerful metaphor. You were carrying not just the financial burden of her theft, but the emotional burden of her projection. She called you the burden while burdening you with her needs, her insecurities, her financial demands. And her lies," I added. "The constant gaslighting, making me doubt my own perceptions, my own worth. Making me believe I needed her to manage my money because I couldn't be trusted to do it myself. And now?" I smiled. "Now I know better. I'm not irresponsible or impulsive or any of the other things she called me to justify controlling my inheritance. I'm actually pretty good with money when it's not being stolen from me." Dr. Rao laughed at that, a warm sound that reminded me how far we'd come from those first tense sessions when I could barely speak about my mother without anxiety overwhelming me. "You've done incredible work, Vanessa, not just in reclaiming your financial inheritance, but in reclaiming your sense of self. Your grandfather left you money, yes, but the greater inheritance is your resilience, your clarity, your ability to set boundaries and stand in your truth." I let her words sink in. "I still have moments of doubt," I admitted. "When I hear she's telling people I've ruined her life, there's this little voice that wonders if I've gone too far, if I should have just let it go for the sake of family peace." "That's normal," Dr. Rao assured me. "You've spent your whole life being conditioned to prioritize her needs and feelings over your own. Breaking that pattern doesn't happen overnight. But when those doubts creep in, I want you to remember something. You didn't create this situation. You merely exposed it. There's a difference between causing harm and refusing to continue accepting harm." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. "I've been thinking about what to do next. With the money, with my life." "And what have you decided?" "I want to start my own design studio," I said, the words coming easier now that I'd said them aloud to myself that morning. "Focus on branding for small businesses, especially women entrepreneurs. Use part of the trust for a down payment on a small place of my own. Invest the rest for the future." "That sounds like a thoughtful, balanced plan," Dr. Rao said. "One that honors both your practical needs and your creative dreams." "There's something else," I added, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "I want to create a scholarship. A small one, for students studying design who come from complicated family backgrounds. Kids who don't have financial or emotional support from their parents. It won't be much at first, maybe just $5,000 a year, but it's a way of transforming your pain into purpose." Dr. Rao finished for me. "Taking what you've learned and using it to help others who are walking a similar path." "Exactly." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger, emotions that had dominated so much of the past 6 months. They were tears of possibility, of hope, of purpose discovered through pain. I spent so many years believing I was the burden my mother said I was. I want to help other young people recognize that they're not the problem, that they deserve support and opportunity, regardless of their family's circumstances. Dr. Rao smiled warmly. That's not just healing, Vanessa, that's transformation. As I left her office for the last time, I felt truly ready to begin the next chapter of my life. Not as the burden my mother had labeled me, but as the builder I had always been beneath the weight of her projections. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first thing I did with my newly transferred trust fund was nothing at all. For 2 weeks, I let it sit untouched in the account while I consulted with a financial advisor. Not a family member, not a friend of my mother's, but a certified professional with stellar reviews whom I researched and chose myself. Her name was Prisha Mehta, and her straightforward approach was exactly what I needed. The best thing you can do right now is not make any major moves until you've had time to process the emotional aspect of this inheritance, she advised during our first meeting. Given the circumstances, there's a lot of psychological weight attached to this money. Let's create a solid plan before you start allocating funds. So that's what we did. Over the course of 3 sessions, we developed a comprehensive financial strategy: 30% for a home purchase, 25% for starting my business, 40% invested for long-term growth and retirement, and 5%, a modest $8,617, to establish the scholarship fund I'd discussed with Dr. Rao. It wasn't life-changing money for the recipients, but it could cover books, supplies, or other expenses that might otherwise create barriers for talented students. With my financial plan in place, I turned my attention to finding a place to live. After years of cramped apartments with roommates, or, more recently, Zoe's spare room, I was ready for a space that was truly mine. I wasn't looking for luxury, just somewhere with good natural light for my design work, in a neighborhood where I could walk to coffee shops and grocery stores, with enough room to breathe, but not so much that I felt lost in it. I found it on the 3rd day of searching. A 1-bedroom condo in a converted warehouse building, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and windows that filled the space with golden light in the late afternoon. The building had a shared rooftop garden and a small gym, and it was 4 blocks from a light rail station. At $189,000, it would take most of my housing allocation, but the moment I walked in, I knew it was home. The day I signed the closing papers, I invited Ryan, his wife Melanie, and James to see the place. They brought a housewarming gift, a potted fiddle-leaf fig tree that Ryan nervously explained was supposed to be good for creative spaces, according to the plant shop lady. "It's perfect," I assured him, touched by the gesture and the thought behind it. James, now 7, ran from room to room, exploring every corner of my new home with the unfiltered enthusiasm only children can muster. "Aunt Nessa, your house is so cool. Can I come over for sleepovers?" I caught Melanie's eye, seeking her approval before answering. She gave me a small nod and a genuine smile. Another healing moment in our complicated family story. "Absolutely," I told James. "We'll set up the sofa bed in the living room, and you can help me decorate it with cool lights." His face lit up. "Can we do stars on the ceiling? Like real constellations?" "That sounds like an excellent project," I agreed, ruffling his hair. Later, after James had exhausted himself exploring and was contentedly drawing at my new dining table, Ryan pulled me aside. "I wanted to let you know that Mom's been calling us non-stop," he said quietly. "She found out about the condo somehow. She's saying you're flaunting your wealth while she struggles to make ends meet." I sighed, feeling the familiar twist of anxiety in my stomach. "I'm not surprised." "Is she still making the court-ordered payments?" "Barely. She makes a big show of how difficult it is each month, how she's having to sacrifice groceries to meet the obligation." He rolled his eyes slightly, a gesture that told me he was finally seeing through our mother's manipulations. "Melanie and I have decided to limit contact for a while. It's not good for James to hear her talking about family members that way, especially you." I felt a rush of gratitude for my brother and sister-in-law. "Thank you." "I know that can't be easy," Ryan shrugged. "Easier than pretending everything is normal when it clearly isn't. Besides, we're enjoying getting to know the real you, Not the version Mom always described. The real me. Not the burden, not the problem child, not the financial drain. Just Vanessa. Creative, determined, worthy of respect and genuine connection. It had taken 30 years and a painful legal battle to emerge, but here I was, standing in my own home, surrounded by people who were choosing to see me clearly. With a place to live secured, I turned my attention to launching my design studio. I'd been freelancing on the side for years, building a small but loyal client base, but now I was ready to make it official. I registered Clarity Design Studio as an LLC, created a sleek website showcasing my portfolio, and transformed the second bedroom of my condo into a functional home office. My business model was simple but specific. I would focus on branding and visual identity for small businesses owned by women and other underrepresented entrepreneurs. My rates would be transparent and accessible, with sliding scale options for startups with limited budgets. I wasn't looking to get rich quick. I wanted to build something sustainable that aligned with my values while allowing me to do work I loved. The first 6 months were challenging. I worked long hours, took on projects that stretched my skills, and learned the unglamorous aspects of business ownership, accounting, contracts, client management, marketing. There were nights I questioned my decision, wondering if I should have played it safer with a full-time job at an established agency. But each time I completed a project and saw how my work helped a small business owner communicate their vision more effectively, I knew I'd made the right choice. Slowly, steadily, Clarity Design Studio began to grow. Referrals led to new clients, and my portfolio expanded to include work for a women-owned bakery, a sustainable fashion startup, a community acupuncture clinic, and a tech platform connecting caregivers with families. By the end of the first year, I had to hire a part-time assistant to help manage the workload, a recent design graduate named Daria, who reminded me of myself at that age. Talented, eager, but unsure of her place in the world. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up work on a particularly challenging project, Daria asked me a question that caught me off guard. How did you know you were ready to start your own studio? I mean, what gave you the confidence to take that leap? I considered my answer carefully. There was the practical aspect, having the financial security of my reclaimed trust fund. But there was something deeper too, something I'd gained through the painful process of standing up to my mother and reclaiming not just my inheritance, but my sense of self-worth. I think, I said slowly, it was learning to trust my own judgment. For a long time, I had someone in my life who made me believe I couldn't make good decisions, especially about money. Breaking free from that influence was the first step. The rest was just logistics. Daria nodded thoughtfully. I get that. My dad always says I'm too artistic to understand business. Like being creative and being practical are mutually exclusive. They're not, I assured her. In fact, creativity can be your greatest asset in business. It helps you see solutions others miss, adapt to challenges, connect with clients on a deeper level. That's what I keep trying to tell him, Daria laughed. Maybe someday he'll believe me. Or maybe someday you'll stop needing him to. I said gently. That was the real turning point for me, realizing that I didn't need the approval or validation of someone who couldn't see my true value. As the words left my mouth, I realized how far I'd come from the young woman who had discovered her mother's theft just over a year ago. That Vanessa had been devastated by the betrayal, yes, but also by the shattering of a lifelong hope that somehow, someday, I would finally earn my mother's genuine approval. It wasn't large, just $5,000 a year to help one design student with expenses not covered by traditional financial aid. But it was mine, created from my heart and funded by my hard-earned success. The application asked students to submit not just their portfolio and financial information, but also a personal statement about their journey and the obstacles they'd overcome. Reading those applications was both heartbreaking and inspiring. So many talented young people navigating circumstances beyond their control. Family estrangement, financial hardship, lack of emotional support for their creative pursuits. I saw myself in their stories, in their determination to build something beautiful despite the voices telling them they couldn't or shouldn't. The first recipient was a sophomore named Marcus, who had been homeless his first semester of college after his parents kicked him out for pursuing design instead of the business degree they demanded. Despite sleeping in his car for months, he had maintained a 3.8 GPA and built an impressive portfolio working on projects for student organizations. His personal statement was raw and honest, but without self-pity, just a clear-eyed assessment of the challenges he'd faced and his unwavering commitment to his chosen path. When I called to tell him he'd been selected, his composure broke for just a moment. "This means I can focus on my studies instead of picking up extra shifts," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing something in me." "I recognize something in you," I corrected gently. "Something I've come to recognize in myself too. The strength to define your own worth when others try to diminish it." After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about the circuitous path that had led me here. How my mother's betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to confront not just the financial theft but the deeper theft of confidence, agency, and self-worth that had been happening my entire life. How standing up for myself in court had strengthened muscles I didn't know I had, the ability to speak my truth, to set boundaries, to demand respect. I thought about the scholarship recipients to come, year after year of young designers who would receive not just financial support, but the message that their dreams mattered, that their creativity had value, that they weren't burdens for choosing a path that called to their hearts. The money my mother had tried to take from me would now help others break free from similar constraints, creating a ripple effect of empowerment and possibility. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Vanessa." My mother's voice, immediately recognizable despite the months of silence between us. Not warm, not conciliatory, sharp-edged and accusatory as always. "I just heard about your little scholarship program. Using my grandchildren's college money to fund strangers? Have you no shame?" I nearly dropped the phone. It had been almost 2 years since the court ruling, 18 months since I'd gained control of my trust, and she was still claiming ownership of my inheritance? Still twisting reality to paint herself as the victim? "That money was never for your grandchildren," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It was my inheritance from Grandpa. For my education, my home, my business. You stole it." The court confirmed that. "Courts don't understand family obligations," she snapped. "Everything I did was for this family. You've torn us apart with your selfishness. Ryan barely speaks to me. Your cousins take your side. All because you couldn't share what you had." I took a deep breath, centering myself. In the past, this kind of confrontation would have sent me spiraling, desperate to defend myself, to make her understand, to somehow win her approval even as she attacked me. But I was different now, stronger, clearer about who I was and what I deserved. "Mom," I said quietly, "I'm not having this conversation. I've moved on with my life. I suggest you do the same." "Moved on?" she scoffed. "Is that what you call stealing a mother's security? Turning family against her? Flaunting your wealth while I—" "Goodbye, Mom," I interrupted, and for the first time in my life, I hung up on her without apologizing, without explaining, without seeking her understanding or approval. My hands were shaking slightly as I set down the phone, but it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from the surging recognition of my own power, not power over her, but power within myself, the power to choose what I would accept, what relationships I would nurture, what story I would write with the life that was fully mine now. I opened the doors to my small balcony and stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. Below, the city pulsed with life, people returning home from work, meeting friends for dinner, walking dogs, living their ordinary, extraordinary lives. I was one of them now, neither more nor less significant, neither burden nor savior. Just Vanessa, building a life aligned with my values, creating meaning from what had once been pain. the scholarship was just the beginning. As Clarity Design Studio continued to grow, I expanded my pro bono work for nonprofits serving vulnerable populations. I mentored young designers from underrepresented backgrounds. I spoke at colleges about ethical business practices and finding purpose through creative work. The wound of my mother's betrayal had scarred over, transforming into a source of strength and clarity about what truly mattered. Not money for its own sake, but what it could create, support, and nurture when used with intention. 2 years to the day after regaining control of my trust fund, I stood at the podium of a small auditorium at my alma mater, preparing to introduce the second annual Clarity Design Scholarship recipient. Looking out at the audience, students, faculty, local design professionals, and yes, even Ryan and his family, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because my journey was over, but because it had evolved into something larger than my individual healing. The path to finding your creative voice is rarely straightforward, I began. Sometimes the greatest obstacles come from those who should be your strongest supporters. Sometimes the labels others place on you, burden, dreamer, impractical, difficult, become the very things you must shed to discover your true worth. I paused, meeting the eyes of young designers who nodded in recognition of this truth. But here's what I've learned. You are not a burden for having dreams. You are not selfish for protecting your gifts. You are not wrong for choosing a path that others don't understand. And sometimes the greatest act of creativity is reimagining yourself beyond the limitations others have placed on you. As I introduced Sophia, this year's scholarship recipient, a talented junior supporting her younger siblings after their parents' deportation, I caught Ryan's eye in the audience. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, his expression a mixture of pride and something like awe. Not for the money I'd reclaimed or the business I'd built, but for the person I'd become in the process. Someone who had transformed theft into generosity, betrayal into purpose, pain into possibility. I wasn't my mother's burden anymore. I was my own creation. Designer not just of logos and websites, but of a life built on truth, boundaries, and the radical act of valuing myself exactly as I was. 3 years after reclaiming my trust fund, I stood in the gleaming lobby of a downtown office building, watching potential clients arrive for Clarity Design Studio's portfolio showcase. We'd outgrown my condo's spare bedroom 6 months ago, moving into this small but elegant office space with room for my team of 4. Me, Daria, now my full-time creative associate, Marcus, our scholarship's first recipient, now interning while finishing his degree, and Imani, our operations manager who kept everything running smoothly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The showcase featured our work for 20 clients, primarily women-owned small businesses that had flourished with our branding and design support. We'd arranged the displays to tell a story, the journey from initial concept to fully realized brand identity, highlighting not just the visual elements, but the strategic thinking behind each decision. It was more than a marketing event. It was a celebration of what we'd built together. As I greeted guests and introduced them to my team, I caught sight of a familiar figure hesitating by the entrance. Ryan. He wasn't on the guest list, and we hadn't spoken in nearly 2 months. Not because of any conflict, but simply because our lives had been moving in different directions. I excused myself from a conversation and crossed the room to meet him. "This is impressive," he said, looking around at the displays, the professionally catered refreshments, the confident ease with which my team interacted with attendees. "I mean, I knew you were doing well, but this is another level, Vanessa." "Thanks," I said, genuinely pleased by his recognition. "What brings you here? Not that you're not welcome, but I didn't expect you." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "I need to talk to you about Mom. It's complicated, but not for right now," he added quickly, seeing my expression change. "This is your night. I don't want to intrude on that. Maybe coffee this weekend?" I nodded, appreciating his respect for the boundaries that had become so important to my well-being. "Saturday morning?" The cafe near my place? Perfect. He hesitated, then gave me a quick, awkward hug. I'm really proud of you, Nessa. What you've built here, it's remarkable. As he left, I turned back to the showcase with a small knot of apprehension forming in my stomach. What could be happening with our mother that would prompt Ryan to seek me out specifically? We'd maintained an unspoken agreement to keep our relationship separate from her ongoing drama, allowing our sibling bond to heal without the toxic dynamics that had shaped our childhood. I pushed the concern aside, refocusing on the evening at hand. This showcase represented everything I'd worked for. Not just the business success, but the creation of something meaningful that aligned with my values. Each display told the story of a small business owner who had trusted us with their vision, and whom we had helped to communicate that vision more effectively to the world. The event was a success by every measure. We secured 3 new clients, received glowing feedback on our portfolio, and even attracted the attention of a local business publication interested in featuring Clarity Design Studio in their Women Entrepreneurs to Watch series. As the last guests departed and my team began the cleanup process, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond professional accomplishment. This was validation of the choices I'd made, the boundaries I'd set, the self-belief I'd cultivated, despite years of being told I was a burden, a dreamer, incapable of managing my own affairs. Saturday morning arrived with golden autumn sunlight streaming through the cafe windows as I waited for Ryan. I'd chosen a quiet corner table, ordered a latte for myself, and remembered to get his preference: Americano with room for cream. A small gesture of the new attentiveness that characterized our rebuilding relationship. He arrived looking tired, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at the showcase. After exchanging pleasantries and taking a few appreciative sips of his coffee, he got to the point. "Mom's in trouble," he said bluntly. "Financial trouble, health trouble, legal trouble, the whole package." I kept my expression neutral, waiting for him to continue rather than jumping in with questions or, worse, premature offers of help. That was the old Vanessa, always rushing to fix problems, especially when they involved family, even at great cost to myself. The new Vanessa had learned the value of listening first, assessing carefully, and making deliberate choices about how to engage. She stopped making the court-ordered repayments about 4 months ago, Ryan continued. I got a call from her neighbor last week. Apparently Mom fell and couldn't get up. She was alone in the house for almost 2 days before anyone found her. I winced at the image, my complicated feelings about my mother temporarily overshadowed by basic human empathy. Is she okay? Physically, more or less. Dehydrated, some bruising, but nothing broken. They kept her for observation and released her. But while she was in the hospital, some papers arrived at her house. The neighbor brought them when she visited. Ryan reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a folder. She's being sued by the bank for defaulting on her mortgage. And there are medical bills she hasn't paid, utility shut-off notices. It's a mess, Vanessa. I accepted the folder but didn't open it immediately. Why are you bringing this to me? You know what she did. You know what our relationship is, or isn't now. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it momentarily caught me off guard. I know. And I'm not asking you to bail her out or fix this. I've been helping where I can, but with James's school expenses and the house repairs we've been putting off. He trailed off. You can't carry it all. I finished for him, and you think I should step in because despite everything, she's still our mother. And because I think there's something else going on that she's not telling me. She's been forgetting things, getting confused about dates and times. The neighbor said she found Mom trying to use her house key to start her car last month. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. You think she's developing dementia? Ryan nodded grimly. The doctor at the hospital suggested cognitive testing, but of course she refused. You know how she is about appearing perfect, in control. I did know. That need for control, for maintaining the image of the flawless mother while hiding her manipulation and exploitation, had defined my childhood and young adult years. It had fueled her theft of my trust fund and her subsequent campaign to paint herself as the victim when the truth was exposed. What are you asking me to do exactly? I kept my voice even, focusing on practical questions rather than the swirl of emotions threatening to cloud my judgment. Just help me figure this out. Not financially, necessarily, though I won't pretend that wouldn't help. But you've always been better at seeing through her manipulations, at understanding what's really happening beneath the surface. I need that perspective now, especially if her cognitive decline is making everything more complicated. I considered his request carefully. 3 years ago, I would have immediately jumped back into the fray, desperate to prove I wasn't the selfish, uncaring daughter my mother had always accused me of being. But 3 years of therapy, boundary setting, and building my own life had given me a clearer perspective on what I owed others versus what I owed myself. "I'll look over these papers," I said finally, "and I'll consider how I might help with the situation. But Ryan, I need to be clear about something. I'll do this on my terms, with boundaries firmly in place. I won't subject myself to her emotional manipulation again, dementia or no dementia." Relief washed over his face. "That's fair. More than fair, given everything. Thank you, Vanessa." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, after my weekly video call with Sophia, our second scholarship recipient, now thriving in her senior year, I finally opened the folder Ryan had given me. The contents confirmed his assessment: mortgage default notices, unpaid medical bills, utility shutoffs, and most concerning, a letter from Adult Protective Services responding to a report filed by a neighbor concerned about self-neglect. I spread everything across my dining table, organizing the papers chronologically to create a timeline. The pattern was clear. My mother's financial situation had been deteriorating steadily since shortly after the court ordered her to repay the money she'd taken from my trust. At first, she'd made the payments, though often late and always with dramatic complaints about the hardship they caused. Then, about a year ago, the payments became irregular. 4 months ago, they stopped entirely. But it wasn't just the missed repayments that troubled me. There were other warning signs in these papers: bills for services she would never have used in her right mind, a cruise booking fee despite her motion sickness, a subscription to an online dating service though she'd always disdained such things, purchases that made no sense for her lifestyle, expensive gardening equipment though she'd never gardened, specialized cooking appliances though she rarely cooked, and most tellingly, duplicate payments for the same bills in the same month, as if she'd forgotten she'd already paid them. The cognitive decline Ryan suspected seemed increasingly likely. And while that didn't excuse the years of manipulation, exploitation, and emotional abuse she'd inflicted, it did complicate the current situation. If she was genuinely becoming unable to manage her affairs, something would need to be done, not for her sake alone, but to protect others from the chaos her decline might create. I closed the folder and opened my laptop, researching cognitive decline, early dementia symptoms, and the legal options for addressing a parent's diminishing capacity. The information was overwhelming and often contradictory, reflecting the complex intersection of medical, legal, and ethical considerations involved. By midnight, I had more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: this situation would require professional guidance beyond what Ryan or I could provide alone. The next morning, I made 3 calls. First to Dr. Rao, to schedule a session to process my feelings about potentially re-engaging with my mother. Second to Marcus Jennings, the attorney who had helped me reclaim my trust, to ask about elder law specialists in his firm. And third to Ryan, to propose a meeting with our mother's primary care physician to discuss our concerns about her cognitive health. "You're willing to do that?" Ryan sounded surprised. "To actually see her, talk to her, doctor?" "With you present, and with clear boundaries in place," I clarified. "This isn't reconciliation, Ryan. It's addressing a potential health and safety issue involving someone who happens to be our mother." "I understand," he said quickly. "And I appreciate it, Vanessa. I really do." The meeting with Dr. Powell was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I met with Sarah Chen, an elder law attorney from Marcus's firm. to understand our options if our mother was indeed experiencing cognitive decline. Based on what you've described, we'd be looking at some form of conservatorship or guardianship, Sarah explained. But that's a significant legal step that removes a person's autonomy. It's not something the courts grant lightly, especially if the individual in question objects, which, from what you've told me about your mother, seems likely. Are there less drastic options? I asked. Something that would ensure bills are paid and basic needs met without completely taking over her life? There are. We could set up a financial power of attorney that activates only under specific conditions. Or create a trust with a professional fiduciary who manages her assets according to predetermined guidelines. But all of these require her cooperation and consent while she still has legal capacity to give it. I nodded, absorbing the information. And if she refuses? If she won't acknowledge the problem or accept help? Sarah's expression was sympathetic, but direct. Then we'd need to document the decline carefully. Missed payments, concerning behaviors, safety issues, until there's enough evidence to petition for conservatorship without her consent. It's not an easy path, Ms. Mitchell, and given your history with your mother, I'd recommend you not be the petitioner. Your brother would be a better— Ryan, that's not— I know, but Dr. Powell is aware of the situation. She understands why we're concerned and agreed this was the best approach. Mom already missed 2 appointments this year. We couldn't risk her canceling this one. I didn't like it, but I understood the reasoning. If our mother was indeed experiencing cognitive decline, getting a professional assessment was crucial for determining next steps. The waiting room of the medical practice was blandly soothing, with muted colors and generic landscape prints on the walls. We sat in silence, both lost in our own thoughts, until the door opened and our mother walked in, followed by a nurse. She stopped abruptly when she saw me, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to anger to a strange, calculating neutrality. "Vanessa," she said, her voice cool. What an unexpected surprise. I nodded, keeping my own expression neutral. "Hello, Mom." She turned to Ryan. "You didn't mention your sister would be joining us." Before Ryan could respond, the nurse interjected smoothly. "Dr. Powell is ready for all of you now. If you'll follow me." Dr. Powell was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and direct, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She greeted us professionally, then addressed our mother. "Mrs. Mitchell, your children have expressed some concerns about changes they've noticed in your memory and daily functioning. I'd like to ask you a few questions and perhaps run some basic cognitive tests today, if that's all right with you." My mother drew herself up with the dignified indignation I remembered so well from childhood. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with my memory or functioning, doctor. This is clearly another attempt by my daughter to paint me as incompetent after she already took my financial security." Dr. Powell didn't react to the accusation. "I understand you feel your concerns are unwarranted. However, it's routine for individuals your age to undergo cognitive screening, especially when family members have noticed concerning changes. Would you be willing to humor me with a few simple questions?" The appeal to routine screening rather than specific concerns seemed to mollify my mother somewhat. She agreed to the assessment, though not without pointed glares at both Ryan and me. What followed was painful to witness. My mother, who had always prided herself on her sharp mind and perfect recall, struggled with basic questions about the date, the current president, and simple arithmetic. When asked to draw a clock face showing a specific time, her attempt was disturbingly asymmetrical, with numbers clustered on one side. Most tellingly, when Dr. Powell asked her about recent events in her life, her answers were confabulated, elaborate stories that blended past and present, real and imagined, in ways that made little logical sense. Ryan squeezed my hand at one point, his expression a mixture of grief and vindication. I felt no satisfaction in seeing our mother's decline confirmed, only a complex sadness for the woman who had once been so formidable, now fumbling through a cognitive assessment she would have aced without effort a few years ago. After the assessment, Dr. Powell asked to speak with Ryan and me privately. With our mother safely ensconced in another room with a magazine and a cup of tea, the doctor was direct. "Based on today's assessment and the history you've provided, I'm concerned about moderate cognitive impairment, possibly early-stage dementia. I'd like to order more comprehensive testing to confirm the diagnosis and determine the specific type of dementia we're dealing with." And in the meantime? Ryan asked. She's living alone, potentially not taking care of bills or even basic needs. Ideally, she would have someone checking in regularly, daily if possible, helping with medication management, meal preparation, bill payment. Does she have anyone who could fulfill that role? Ryan and I exchanged glances. Not currently, he said. But we'll figure something out. Dr. Powell nodded. I'll provide referrals to home care services that specialize in dementia support. And I strongly recommend you consult with an elder law attorney about financial management options while your mother still has periods of lucidity. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Powell pulled me aside. Your mother mentioned some history between you, she said tactfully. I want you to know that whatever happened in the past, dementia changes the equation. The person she was and the person she's becoming are not entirely the same. That doesn't invalidate your experiences or feelings, but it may help to keep in mind as you navigate this difficult transition. I nodded, unable to articulate the swirl of emotions her words evoked. How do you reconcile the harm done by someone who may no longer fully remember doing it? How do you maintain necessary boundaries while acknowledging the vulnerability of cognitive decline? These were questions I would need to sit with, process with Dr. Rao, before making any decisions about my level of involvement going forward. In the car afterward, Ryan and I discussed next steps in the muted, shell-shocked tones of people who had just had their worst fears confirmed. I can help financially, I said eventually, to hire home care, to catch up on the essential bills. But I can't be her caregiver, Ryan. I can't put myself in that position. I wouldn't ask that of you, he assured me. After everything she did, no. But I appreciate any help you're willing to provide. I'll take the lead on coordinating care and following up with the specialists. And the legal aspects? Sarah Chen mentioned conservatorship might eventually be necessary. Ryan sighed heavily. One step at a time. Let's get the comprehensive testing done, set up some immediate support, and then revisit the legal options based on the full diagnosis. We agreed on this measured approach, each committing to specific tasks according to our capabilities and boundaries. As Ryan dropped me off at my condo, he hesitated before I got out of the car. Do you ever wonder? He began, then stopped. Wonder what? If she was already starting to slip when she took your money. If the early stages of this, whatever it is, influenced her behavior then. I had wondered that, particularly while researching dementia symptoms the previous week. Some forms of dementia could indeed manifest first as changes in financial judgment, ethical reasoning, or impulse control. But I was wary of retroactively excusing years of calculated exploitation based on a recent diagnosis. Maybe, I acknowledged. But the theft went on for years, Ryan. It was systematic, deliberate. And when confronted, she constructed elaborate lies to cover it up. That doesn't sound like cognitive impairment to me. That sounds like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. He nodded slowly. You're right. I guess I was looking for, I don't know, a way to make sense of it all. Some things don't make sense, I said gently. Some people hurt others because of their own unhealed wounds, their own distorted perceptions. It doesn't have to be a brain disease to be a kind of sickness. As I watched his car pull away, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. 3 years ago, I had vowed to cut all ties with the woman who had stolen my inheritance while calling me a burden. Now I was contemplating how best to help ensure her care and safety as her mind deteriorated, not out of obligation or guilt, but from a place of compassion that acknowledged her humanity without erasing her actions or their impact on me. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Mom's Care Plan. Inside, I started a document listing the financial support I was willing to provide, the boundaries I needed to maintain, and the specific ways I could help from a distance without becoming enmeshed in daily caregiving. It was a blueprint for compassion with boundaries, generosity with self-protection. As I worked, I realized something profound. This approach, clear-eyed, boundaried compassion, wasn't just about my mother's care. It was about my own healing, my own growth beyond the either-or thinking that had characterized our relationship for so long. Either I was the perfect, self-sacrificing daughter, or I was the selfish burden she'd labeled me. Either I cut all ties, or I surrendered my hard-won autonomy. But life rarely conforms to such stark dichotomies. The truth was messier, more nuanced. I could acknowledge my mother's vulnerability without erasing her accountability. I could offer practical support without sacrificing my emotional well-being. I could be generous without being a doormat, compassionate without being a martyr. In creating this careful balance, I was finally stepping fully into the person I'd been becoming since that first shocking discovery of her theft. Someone who valued both kindness and self-respect, who could set boundaries without building walls, who understood that true strength lies not in coldness or capitulation, but in the courage to remain open-hearted while protecting your own peace. The burden my mother had placed on me, both literally through her financial exploitation and figuratively through her constant criticism, had become the catalyst for my greatest growth. By reclaiming not just my trust fund but my self-trust, I had transformed her theft into a gift, the gift of becoming fully authentically myself. 6 months after discovering my mother's cognitive decline, I stood at the podium of a small conference room in a downtown hotel, facing an audience of young designers and entrepreneurs. The event, Design Your Life, Building a Career with Purpose, was organized by a local business incubator, and I'd been invited as the keynote speaker. Not because Clarity Design Studio had become an industry giant. It hadn't. We were still a boutique firm with selective clients. But because our story of ethical growth and purpose-driven success had begun to resonate beyond our immediate circle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When people ask me how I built my business, I began, they're usually looking for tactical advice, marketing strategies, pricing formulas, client acquisition techniques. Those things matter, of course, but they're not the foundation. The true foundation is knowing your worth. Not just what to charge, but what you bring to the table beyond your technical skills, your unique perspective, your values, your boundaries. As I spoke, I scanned the audience, noting the mix of eager faces, thoughtful nods, and occasionally that flash of recognition that told me someone was connecting deeply with my words. This wasn't just professional advice, it was personal truth distilled from hard-won experience. 4 years ago, I discovered that someone I trusted had been systematically undermining my financial future while telling me I wasn't capable of managing it myself. That discovery was devastating, but it became the catalyst for everything I've built since. Not because of the money, though that helped, but because it forced me to confront a painful question. What happens when you've spent your whole life believing you're a burden, only to discover you've been carrying someone else's weight all along? The room was silent now, the audience leaning slightly forward in that subtle way people do when they're fully engaged. I hadn't planned to share so personally, but something about these aspiring creators, many still finding their footing in a world that often devalued their work, called for authentic connection rather than polished platitudes. The answer, at least for me, was transformation. I had to learn to trust my own judgment after years of having it undermined. I had to build boundaries after a lifetime of having them violated. I had to redefine success on my own terms, rather than constantly seeking approval I was never going to receive. And most challenging of all, I had to stop seeing myself as the burden I'd been labeled and recognize my true value, not just as a designer, but as a human being worthy of respect, trust, and fair treatment. I went on to share practical insights from Clarity's journey, how we'd defined our niche, built our client base, expanded thoughtfully rather than chasing rapid growth. But I returned repeatedly to the deeper themes that had shaped our development: authentic value, ethical practice, purposeful boundaries, and the courage to align your business with your true self rather than contorting to meet others' expectations. After the formal presentation, a small group gathered around me with follow-up questions. One young woman, barely out of college by the look of her, waited until the others had dispersed before approaching. "Can I ask you something more personal?" she said hesitantly. "About what you said regarding boundaries and worth?" "Of course," I smiled encouragingly. "My parents paid for my design degree," she began, eyes downcast. "But every time I try to make a career decision they don't agree with, they remind me how much they invested in me, how I owe it to them to take the practical path they prefer. I feel stuck, like I'll always be paying off a debt I never knew I was accumulating. The echo of my own experience was so strong I almost flinched. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Olivia." "Olivia, here's something it took me far too long to learn. Support that comes with invisible strings attached isn't support. It's control. And you don't owe anyone your dreams, your authentic path, or your peace of mind in exchange for help they freely offered." Her eyes widened slightly. "But they sacrifice so much. Parents are supposed to support their children's education if they're able," I said firmly. "That's not sacrifice, it's responsibility, and it doesn't give them ownership of your future. Would you say the same about food and shelter they provided when you were growing up? That you owe them your life's direction because they fed and housed you?" I never thought of it that way. The most valuable gift you can give the people who truly love you is living authentically, with integrity to your own vision, not contorting yourself to fulfill theirs. Olivia nodded slowly, something shifting behind her eyes. "Thank you. That helps a lot, actually." As she walked away, I felt that peculiar mixture of satisfaction and melancholy that often accompanied these moments. Joy at potentially helping someone avoid the pitfalls that had trapped me for so long. Sadness for the years I'd lost to the same limiting beliefs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Later that evening, as I drove across town to my mother's new assisted living facility, I reflected on how far I'd come in my own journey of setting boundaries while maintaining compassion. The comprehensive testing Dr. Powell had ordered confirmed what we'd suspected. My mother was in the early to middle stages of frontotemporal dementia, a form that often affects behavior, judgment, and executive function before memory. While it didn't excuse her years of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, it did explain some of the escalation in her behavior over the past few years. With Ryan taking the lead and my financial support in the background, we'd established a care plan that balanced her needs with our boundaries. A professional fiduciary now managed her finances, ensuring bills were paid and assets properly managed. The mortgage default had been addressed through a loan modification, preventing foreclosure. And 3 months ago, when it became clear she could no longer safely live alone, we'd moved her to Willow Creek, a facility specializing in memory care. I visited once a month, not out of obligation, but as a conscious choice to remain connected while protecting my own emotional well-being. These visits were sometimes difficult, often unpredictable, but occasionally yielded moments of unexpected grace. Today, as I signed in at the front desk, the administrator greeted me warmly. "She's having a good day, Ms. Mitchell." Very present, very engaged in the morning's art therapy session. "They're just finishing up in the activity room if you'd like to see her work." I thanked her and made my way down the softly lit hallway to the activity room, where several residents sat at tables covered with art supplies. My mother was at a table near the window, head bent in concentration over a watercolor painting. The scene was oddly familiar, an echo of my own childhood posture at the kitchen table, carefully coloring while she prepared dinner, one of the rare peaceful moments in our turbulent relationship. As if sensing my presence, she looked up. For a moment, her eyes were clear and focused, recognition dawning without the usual confusion or hostility. "Vanessa," she said simply, "you came." "I did," I agreed, pulling up a chair beside her. "What are you painting?" She glanced down at the watercolor, a loose interpretation of a flower garden. "It's the backyard at the old house. Remember the peonies? They'd bloom just in time for your birthday every year." I did remember, though I was surprised she did. Those peonies were among the few unambiguously positive memories from my childhood. Their extravagant pink blossoms, their sweet fragrance, the way she'd cut a few to place in a vase on the kitchen table every May when I turned another year older. "They were beautiful," I said. "You always said they were showing off just for me." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You believed that until you were 9. Then you got very serious and explained that flowers don't bloom for people, they bloom because of scientific processes." I laughed softly, remembering my precocious certainty. I was a know-it-all. You were curious, thoughtful. You wanted to understand how things worked. She set down her paintbrush and looked at me directly, with a clarity that had become increasingly rare. You were never a burden, you know. The words hit me like a physical force. After years of being told exactly the opposite, after having my inheritance stolen while being labeled a financial drain, after rebuilding my life around the rejection of that harmful narrative, to hear her say this now, in a moment of lucidity, was both healing and heartbreaking. You called me that, I said quietly, not accusingly, but seeking understanding. Many times. She frowned slightly, confusion clouding her eyes. Did I? That doesn't sound right. You were always so capable, so bright. I was proud of you. And there it was, the cruel reality of her disease. It wasn't just erasing her memory of recent events. It was rewriting her narrative of our relationship, creating an alternate history where she had been the supportive mother I'd always craved. Part of me wanted to correct her, to insist she acknowledge the hurt she'd caused. But what would that accomplish now? Her brain was literally changing, deteriorating. The person who had stolen my trust fund while calling me a burden was both present and absent in the woman sitting before me. Your painting is lovely, I said instead, choosing compassion in this moment, though not at the expense of the boundaries and self-respect I'd worked so hard to establish. The colors are so vibrant, she beamed, momentarily childlike in her pleasure at the compliment. The art teacher says I have a good eye for composition. I never knew I could paint. Maybe it was always there, just waiting for the right time to emerge. We spent the next hour in surprisingly comfortable conversation, moving from her artwork to the activities offered at Willow Creek, to memories she still retained clearly, mostly from the distant past, when I was very young, before our relationship had soured into criticism and control. As often happened during these visits, there were disorienting moments when she confused me with her sister, or jumped decades in her recollections, but overall, it was one of our better interactions since her diagnosis. As I prepared to leave, she suddenly reached for my hand, her fingers cool and papery against my skin. I did something wrong, didn't I? Something to do with money. The directness of the question caught me off guard. Yes, I said carefully, but it's being handled now. You don't need to worry about it. She nodded slowly. I think I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of not having enough. Of being left with nothing. Her eyes clouded, not with confusion this time, but with something like remorse, though it was hard to tell how much she truly remembered or understood. My father always said a woman without her own money is at everyone's mercy. I think I got confused about what was mine. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was perhaps as close to an explanation as I would ever get. Her father, my grandfather, had indeed grown up during the Depression and instilled in his children a near-obsessive concern with financial security. In her deteriorating cognitive state, had those early warnings become distorted, overwhelming her ethical boundaries? It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it offered a glimpse into the tangled fears that might have driven her behavior. It's okay, I said, not because it was, but because forgiveness, or at least a release of the anger that had once consumed me, was a gift I gave myself, not her. Everything is taken care of now. On the drive home, I called Ryan to update him on my visit. She was surprisingly lucid today. I told him. We actually had a real conversation for a while. That happens sometimes with this type of dementia, he said. The doctors call them islands of clarity, in the progressive decline. Did she say anything about the past? About what happened with your trust? Not directly. She acknowledged doing something wrong with money, but didn't seem to fully remember the details. She talked about being afraid of not having enough. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Do you think that's why she did it? Fear? Maybe partly. But fear doesn't explain the years of calling me a burden while living off my inheritance. It doesn't explain the manipulation, the gaslighting when confronted, the way she turned family against me. I paused, considering. I think the full truth is more complicated than any single explanation. And we might never fully understand it now. Probably not, he agreed. Does that bother you? Not having closure in the traditional sense? I thought about it as I navigated through evening traffic. Less than it used to. I found a different kind of closure. Not through her acknowledgement or apology, but through my own growth, through building a life that reflects my true worth, through helping others recognize theirs. The Clarity Design Scholarship was now in its 4th year, supporting a new recipient annually while maintaining mentorship relationships with past scholars. Marcus, our first recipient, had graduated and joined the studio full-time, bringing fresh energy and perspective to our work. Sophia was completing a prestigious internship in New York. Our newest scholar, Eli, was using his design skills to create accessible communication tools for neurodivergent children, work that had already attracted attention from educational publishers. Beyond the scholarship, Clarity had launched a workshop series for creative entrepreneurs, focused on ethical business practices, value-based pricing, and establishing healthy client boundaries. What had begun as my personal healing journey had expanded into a mission to help others avoid the traps of undervaluing their work and themselves, of accepting the burden label that so often gets placed on creative people, particularly those from backgrounds where their talents aren't understood or valued. You've built something meaningful out of all this, Ryan said, a note of admiration in his voice. Not just your business, but this whole philosophy of value and boundaries. It's helped me, too, you know. Made me rethink how I was raising James, the messages I was unconsciously sending him about worth and success. The mention of my nephew brought a smile to my face. Now 10, James was showing real talent as a writer, filling notebooks with intricate stories and observations. Unlike my mother, Ryan and Melanie actively supported his creative interests, making sure he understood that his worth wasn't tied to conventional achievement or financial metrics. Speaking of James, don't forget I'm taking him to the Science Museum this weekend. I reminded Ryan. He wants to see the new robotics exhibit. He's been talking about it all week. You're officially the coolest ant in the universe, according to him. After we hung up, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led me here. 4 years ago, the discovery of my mother's theft had shattered my world, not just because of the financial implications, but because it confirmed the painful suspicion that had haunted me since childhood, that the person who should have been my strongest advocate saw me instead as a burden, a resource to exploit, a problem to manage. The journey from that devastating revelation to where I stood now hadn't been linear or easy. There had been legal battles, family rifts, periods of doubt and grief, but there had also been profound growth, unexpected allies, and the gradual reclamation not just of my financial inheritance but of my sense of self-worth. I'd learned that boundaries aren't walls but vital demarcations that protect your energy, your peace, and your purpose. I'd discovered that compassion doesn't require sacrifice or self-erasure, that you can acknowledge another's pain while still honoring your own. I'd found that true healing doesn't depend on receiving apologies or even understanding from those who've hurt you. It comes from reclaiming your narrative, your value, your right to define success on your own terms. Most importantly, I'd realized that the burden label my mother had placed on me was never about my worth. It was a projection of her own unresolved fears, her distorted relationship with security and control. Understanding this didn't erase the harm she'd caused, but it helped me stop internalizing her narrative and start writing my own. The following morning, I met with a potential new client, a woman in her 50s who had left corporate life to start a sustainable fashion company focused on adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. As she shared her vision with passionate detail, I found myself thinking about the recursive nature of healing and growth. Each client who trusted us with their brand, each student who received our scholarship, each attendee at our workshops, was part of an expanding circle of impact that had begun with that painful moment of discovering my mother's betrayal. What I love about your studio's approach, the client was saying, is that you clearly understand it's not just about making things look good. It's about aligning visual identity with deeper values, with purpose. I smiled, appreciating her insight. That's exactly our philosophy. Design isn't just surface. It's the visual expression of what matters most, the core values that drive your work and connect you with the people you're meant to serve. As we continued our discussion, mapping out potential directions for her brand identity. I felt that familiar sense of alignment and purpose that had become the hallmark of my rebuilt life. The work I did now wasn't just about making a living or proving my worth. It was about creating clarity for clients, for scholarship recipients, for myself, clarity about value, boundaries, and the courage to live authentically, even when others try to define you differently. Later that day, I received an email from Olivia, the young designer I'd spoken with after my presentation. She'd attached a portfolio of work that showed remarkable talent and a distinctive point of view, along with a note. After our conversation, I had a long talk with my parents about my career goals. For the first time, I didn't apologize for my choices or try to justify them. I just owned them. It was scary but liberating. They didn't immediately understand, but they listened in a way they never had before. Thank you for helping me find the words and the courage to advocate for my own path. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I wrote back, encouraging her work and offering to connect her with potential mentors in her specific area of interest. This was the ripple effect of reclaiming your own worth, the ability to help others recognize and stand firm in theirs. That evening, as I prepared for a video call with our scholarship committee to review applications for the coming year, I paused to look around my home office. On the wall facing my desk hung a simple framed quote, words I'd written during those first raw days after discovering my mother's theft, when I was still trying to make sense of how someone could call me a burden while secretly living off my inheritance. Your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. It is revealed in how you rise, how you give, and how you redefine the narrative you were handed. Those words had become both my personal mantra and the philosophical foundation of everything I'd built since. My business, my scholarship program, my workshops, my carefully reconstructed relationship with Ryan and his family, and even my compassionate but boundaried approach to my mother's care as her dementia progressed. The burden I was once labeled had become a bridge to purpose, to authentic connection, to meaningful work that honored both creativity and worth. The inheritance that was stolen had been reclaimed and transformed into a legacy that extended far beyond financial security, a legacy of value recognized, boundaries respected, and potential fulfilled. As I settled in to review the scholarship applications, each representing a young creative with dreams, talent, and their own complicated story, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because my journey was over, but because it had evolved into something larger than my individual healing. The narrative I'd been handed was not the one I was passing on. Instead, I was helping write a new story, for myself and for others, about recognizing your inherent worth and refusing to accept the burden label from anyone, no matter how convincingly they try to place it on your shoulders. The trust that had been broken, both financial and emotional, had ultimately led me to the greatest trust of all, trust in myself, in my judgment, in my right to define my own value. And that was an inheritance no one could ever steal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.